Alan Rogers from Bogart Christian Church in Bogart, Georgia. And for those of you that know me through my Emmaus friends that have joined us, I'm from Bogart, Georgia, where we believe in Bogart. But first and foremost, we believe in Jesus Christ. It is my delight and my thrill to be here with you today, to be a part of a community that cares enough to join together, no matter what the circumstances, pandemic or not. This church is in business, and we are in business as a community to support one another. So I'm delighted that you're here, and I would also relay the welcome and the hello from Ted Tedder of Bogart First Baptist Church, and pray that, Ted, that you are doing well. Our scripture this evening is from the book of John, the Gospel of John, chapter 13. We'll read verses 1 through 17. And the translation that I'll be reading from is the New Revised Standard Version. Hear the word from the Lord. Now, before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The devil had already put it into the heart of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray him. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from the table, took off his outer robe, and tied a towel around himself. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" And Jesus answered, "You do not know what I'm doing, but later you'll understand." And Peter said to him, "You'll never wash my feet." And Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no share with me." And Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." And Jesus said to him, "One who is bathed does not need to wash except for the feet, but is entirely clean. And you are clean, though not all of you." For he knew who was to betray him. For this reason he said, "Not all of you are clean." After he had washed their feet, had put on his robe, and had returned to the table, he said to them, "Do you know what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, for that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example that you should also do as I have done to you. Very truly, I tell you, servants are not greater than their master, nor are messengers greater than the one who sent them. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them." This is the word of God for the people of God. May God add his blessing to our understanding of this, his holy word. I know a good number of folks that are teachers, and some of them are on with us now, or former teachers, retired teachers. Well, a few weeks, perhaps you can relate to this story, a few weeks into a new school year, a teacher by the name of Susan Moser, who was from Pennsylvania, asked her young son, "How's it going in your first classes at first grade?" And with enthusiasm, he replied, "I love school. It's awesome." And then he thought for a moment, and he added, "Well, except for one thing." And she said, "What's that, son?" He said, "I don't really like it when Mrs. Decker tries to teach us stuff." Now that's a problem, isn't it? Some of our students with the congregation, I'm sure, would agree that learning is not all fun and games. It can be frustrating for both the student and the teacher, as many of us have come to know in these days of separation and distance learning. Every day I read the story of some frustrated parent who is just ready to throw up their hands as they try to help their children learn. Well, you know what? Jesus' disciples would certainly agree with that first grader. They didn't like it much when Jesus tried to teach them stuff. Imagine Jesus' frustration, on the other hand, as he tried to teach his disciples to live a kingdom life here on earth. See, they wanted an earthly kingdom of might and of power. He taught them about a heavenly kingdom, a kingdom of love and of grace. They wanted quick results, instant results, and Jesus taught the value of patience and of perseverance. The disciples wanted easy answers, and Jesus challenged them to ask different questions. In our Bible passage this evening, Jesus knows that he will be returning to the Father soon. He'll be leaving his disciples to carry on his message. And so he takes the opportunity to teach them one last valuable lesson. As our first verse says, having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. And then Jesus did the last thing that anyone ever expected that he would do. He wrapped a towel around his waist and he began washing their feet. You see, in Jesus' day, the washing of feet was a task reserved not just for servants, but for the lowest of servants. Every circle, has its pecking order, and the circle of household workers was no exception. The servant at the bottom of the totem pole was expected to be the one on his knees, the one with the towel in the basin and getting dirty washing one's feet. Max Lucado wrote this about this. In this case, the one with the towel and basin is the king of the universe. Hands that shape the stars now wash away the filth. Fingers that form the mountains and the peaks and the valleys now massages feet. And the one before whom all nations will one day kneel now kneels before each of those that he serves. Hours before his own death, Jesus' concern is singular. It's laser focused. He wants his disciples to know just how much he loves them. More than removing dirt, Jesus is removing doubt. All of that was by Max Lucado. I thought about that an awful lot this week. What profound words. More than removing dirt, Jesus is removing doubt. Ralph Waldo Emerson once wrote this, all persons are puzzles until at last we find some word or act, which is the key to the woman or the man. Straightway all their past words and actions lie in light before us. In other words, some word, some act absolutely cuts to the chase, gets past any of the words and the stuff that we say about ourselves, but shows the real us. This moment, this act of washing his disciples' feet is the key to understanding all of Jesus' past words and of his past actions. What do you suppose he's saying here? My love for you knows no end, no boundaries. You, child, are precious to me, so precious that no sacrifice is too great for you. And as you picture Jesus kneeling in front of his disciples, remember this, he knew that within a matter of hours, all of these people in the room with him now would desert him. At this, his hour of greatest need, they would every person fail him. Judas was already plotting against him. Peter would soon deny him. What did Jesus think he was doing? Well, it's easy. He was showing them how to love. He was showing them the full extent of his love. And in this moment, Jesus was giving them the most forceful, the most unmistakable example of what agape love is all about. That is unconditional, undeserved, sacrificial, no strings attached love. That's what agape love is. Agape love, as shown by Jesus, will go to any length for the sake of others. It can't stoop too low. It can't climb too high or climb the highest mountain, hang on too long. It can't suffer too much for the sake of that he is loving on. Now, make no mistake about it, I'm not talking about an abusive situation, hanging on for the sake of love. Abuse is not and never will be love. But status seeking and selfishness never interfere with the acts of agape love, as evidenced through us. Many years ago, a sticky situation arose at the wedding ceremony for the Duke of York. All the guests and the wedding attendants were in place. Majestic organ music filled that beautiful sanctuary, Westminster Abbey. But something was just not right. As part of the marriage ceremony, the Duke and his bride were to kneel on a cushioned bench to receive a blessing. And a nervous whisper began to work out through the crowd, through the congregation, as guests noticed that one of the cushions from the kneeling bench had fallen to the floor. And most of the attendants standing near the kneeling bench had royal bloodlines, or at least, the very least, they were from the upper crust of British society. Well, to reach down and pick up a pillow would have been beneath them. Or perhaps, to give credit for the possibility, they were just embarrassed and didn't know how to handle it. So they all pretended to ignore that misplaced pillow until the Prince of Wales, who was a groomsman, picked it up and returned it to the bench. Now, that may not impress us very much, but in a society that's class conscious, it was an extraordinary act. We can laugh, but it's no easier to ignore status in our society here in America. The hunger for status springs from our own insecurities. Many of us carry around a deep wound, perhaps a huge question mark. Where a healthy image should be, it's filled with that question. According to Lawrence O. Richards, only someone who is secure in his or her identity can humble himself and become a servant to others. John chapter 13, verse 3 mentions that Jesus had come from the Father and knew that he was returning to that Father. He had no qualms about his identity. He wasn't threatened, he wasn't diminished in any way by humbling himself and stooping to the ground and washing those feet. He chose his servanthood over status. It's those who are insecure in their identity that must constantly strive to appear great or to be absolutely in control. Humility is threatening to those who really don't know who or what they are. Pastor Bill Hyable's father was an ambitious, successful businessman with a busy schedule, yet his father always carved out one afternoon a week to spend with a group of mentally disabled women at a local hospital. For 25 years, he led a Sunday afternoon song service at that hospital. He led a song service with these women, and he knew each one by name. And he treated each and every one with respect. These women couldn't do much for him in return. They were incapable of it. But he found genuine and great joy in serving them. Now, what would motivate a successful, very busy executive to spend time with poor women with limited capabilities? What kind of love doesn't expect anything in return? You see, this kind of love costs us something. It's inconvenient, it's often messy, it's sacrificial, it hurts. This kind of love makes no sense, and that's why it's so very powerful. our act of agape love towards others is the best evidence that we can give the world of the reality of Jesus Christ. There was a pastor by the name of Ron Mell. He was newly assigned to his first congregation, and he learned that one of his many responsibilities when he got there, in addition to cutting the grass and any number of things, was to watch out for one of the congregants, a man by the name of Jim. You see, Jim was an alcoholic. Jim had the annoying habit of calling almost every Friday night, every Friday night, at some unrealistic hour, and asking the pastor for a ride home from the local bar. And many times Mel considered saying no, but he never did. Instead, he would drag himself up out of bed and drive down to the local bar, and then he would help Jim out of that bar. And when Jim was this drunk, he usually did one of two things. He talked incessantly, or he purged himself of that which he had been partaking. Ask yourself, how would you feel about mopping that up out of your car time and time again? How many times would you be able to do that before you say, take a hike, I'm done? But he had the heart of God, and he never did tell him no. He never did tell him off. It took years, literally years, of this kind of love before Jim came around. But eventually he gave up booze, and he became one of the pastor's most committed, fruitful church members of the whole congregation. You see, if we could peek into the lives of those around us, we'd see many acts of agape love each and every day in their everyday lives. Think of those who are giving care to those with coronavirus today. Think of that nurse or of an LPN and who spends all of his or her days on cleaning out bedpans and setting up IV bags. Patients too stressed out to show their gratitude. Sometimes on a ventilator and unable to show anything. The father who cleans up after a sick child, the wife who patiently cares for a husband with Parkinson's, the teacher who spends extra moments in her own time or on her own time or his own time with a slower student, the young woman who raises money for charity, the man or woman who does an act of kindness for someone who can never pay them back. See, that's the kind of love that honors God. It's the kind of love that embodies Christ. And it has the power to change lives because it's Christ-like. Ray Hansch had been praying for an opportunity to tell his neighbors about Jesus. But rather than opening a door for him, God was repeatedly sending him to a neighbor by the name of Jim. Jim, you see, had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. On their first visit together, Jim asked Ray to teach him how to pray. Now, that was a difficult task because Jim's mind was fogged by large doses of painkillers. It was difficult to keep his attention. And at first, Ray didn't know how to pray with him, but he listened carefully to Jim's thoughts and his fears. And then he would go home and write out a prayer based on their conversation together. He really listened, and he poured his heart into those prayers. The light in Jim's eyes showed that he relished those prayers. When Jim died, the family asked Ray to perform the eulogy, and as Ray looked out over those that were gathered in a place much like this, he saw all of his neighbors there. And once he had prayed that God would allow him to witness to his neighbors, but God led him to Jim, and now he had the opportunity to witness and to share Jim's faith with all of his neighbors and share their many prayer times together. To all those who love through the difficult times, to all those who don't let status get in the way of service, to all of those who give without expecting anything in return, to all those who do the jobs that society looks down on, essential jobs, but still look down on, I encourage you, look in the mirror. Look in the mirror, because that's the face of Jesus that you'll see in that mirror. Brothers and sisters, that's what we are all called to do. All of us are called to agape love. And you might ask yourself, who, me? Yeah, you, me, we. Will you answer that call? Tonight, as we remember that upper room and the meal that Christ shared with those who he knew would desert him, he calls on you too to love with agape love. No strings attached. No status matters. Who, me? Yep, you. Amen.